right, so welcome everybody to, I think this is number 5 now, number 5 live Q&A. So just a couple of notes before we get into the details. I will be continuing this process on into the new year. So every second Saturday, this is going to be an ongoing thing for the foreseeable future. So if you want to plan around that, that's great. Or you can always listen to the recording if the time doesn't work for you. The only slight change that we're going to have is that starting in January, the Q&As are going to be a little bit shorter. So we'll do 40 to 45 minutes of questions, followed by the breath work and meditation, so that all told, we won't be much over an hour. And that takes up just a little bit less of everybody's Saturday, but still enough time for us to really get to some good questions and still do our meditation. So again, continuing on in the new year, but a little bit shorter, so an hour or just over an hour in total, starting in January. So I see Clippy's already put a question in. That's fabulous. Anyone else who wants to throw in a question, please feel free to do so on the chat. Or, of course, you're always welcome to come off mute and share something. This is being recorded, obviously, but I'm pinned, so it will just be your voice that's heard. It won't be, your picture that shows up, but you are welcome to share that way as well. And so Cliffy's question is identifying and working with automatic negative thoughts. Which books of CBT are the most helpful? The ones that I like the best, there's a couple different ones by Daniel Amen, Amen, and he has two, they're really actually quite short books. One is called Conquering Your Negative Thoughts. The other one is Conquering Worry and Anxiety. And they're not hard to read. Like, I think it took me maybe a few hours total to go from one end of the books to the other. They are based in cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT, really helpful tools and techniques. There are overlaps between those two books, but I do believe that there's value in getting both of them because they do have some different tools in them as well. And it'll get you started on that notion of working with, from a CBT perspective, of working with automatic negative thoughts. Now, something else to keep in mind, in addition to delving more into literature around that, which I think is a great idea, and especially if you're willing to practice the tools that he recommends, I think it's going to be fabulous for you. And so there's a request here to just type it into the chat. So I'm going to do that right now. So it's Daniel Amen, Conquering Your Negative Thoughts. And the other one is Conquering Worry and Anxiety. If I can spell. There we go. All right. And they're available really easily. You can order them off Amazon or whatever you choose. They're not very expensive either, which is kind of nice because they're just little, but they're potent, very potent. So backing up for a moment. So what I was going to say is that in addition to reading about it and practicing the tools, you might also want to really consider that there's a couple of things to familiarize yourself with what the most common automatic negative thoughts are, right? So sometimes they're called cognitive distortions, sometimes they're called automatic negative thoughts. And even if you Google that, you'll usually get a good list of what all of the different ones are. Or if you're a DNRSer, you can go back and review, in your program, the list of the most common ones that they talk about in there, to really start to bring to conscious awareness again, like, what are some of the different categories, or the most common different categories of those automatic negative thoughts that come up. And then we want to cultivate the curious observer, right? So we can't change what we're not aware of. So the more we cultivate the curious observer and notice what our thought patterns are, the more equipped you are to then actually intervene and do some of the tools that, Daniel Amen suggests. or that are used in cognitive behavior therapy. By the way, the whole stop thing is also used in cognitive behavior therapy, not just brain retraining. So that notion of saying stop when you notice the automatic negative thoughts coming up and then actively directing to something else, or questioning, those thoughts. Sometimes we go through a process of actually questioning them as to their validity and whether they're true and whether there's evidence to support that. And sometimes that can be really helpful, right? To start to recognize, especially thoughts that we tend to buy into or believe just because they're so pervasive in our system, but they don't really have any kind of a foundation in reality, or there's not a lot of evidence to support those thoughts if we actually step back and start to look at them and analyze them. So, I would say there is a time and a place for a little bit more analysis around negative thoughts. It's not necessarily something that you want to do ongoing ad nauseum for, a year, or even extensively for months and months and months. The evaluating them or looking for evidence, but taking a window of time, a few weeks, maybe even a month or two, to really start to look at them and to pull them apart a little bit more, sometimes is what people need to really be able to recognize the false messages that are in there, and to be able to more actively engage and intervene in shifting those negative thoughts. And we know that having that ability to change the channel in your mind, or to recognize and redirect when negative thoughts are coming up, is a huge part of the recovery process, right? And a huge part of rewiring your brain, stopping the stimulation to the maladaptive pathways, and instead then we change the channel, we change our focus of attention, and then we stimulate the positive pathways, which helps us move forward, right? And helps us grow. So that was kind of a long-winded answer for a book, but hopefully that was helpful. And so yeah, if there's any other questions, you can pop them in the chat, or come off mute. And while we're waiting for those, one of the things that I wanted to share today was, I was thinking earlier today, or earlier this morning, about the notion of flexibility, and how flexibility is a really key part to recovery when we're looking at recovery from the space of not just symptom alleviation, but having resilience ongoing, having that capacity to thrive, to navigate, the inevitable ups and downs of life. Flexibility is a big piece to that. Now, when I talk about flexibility, there's flexibility on multiple levels that we're looking at here, right? So there's absolutely physical flexibility would be part of it, right? So we hold a lot of often tension and rigidity in our physical body, in our muscles, musculature, which then lends to not having that flexibility of movement, not having that ideal circulation or energy flow, if you want to look at it that way. That does tie into thriving and resilience and overall well-being. And for people with energy its or chronic pain its, movement is absolutely a must do, as part of the recovery process or recovery trajectory. So we may be starting really small, depending on what our training zone is or what's available to us right now. We might be starting really small and working our way up, but that ability to move, to get things flowing in the physical body, creating a little bit of stretching, so that we have flexibility in our musculature, I would say is definitely a part of that recovery when we're talking about recovery in the sense of resilience and thriving. So that's physical flexibility. And then we have cognitive flexibility. And this kind of ties into, changing the channel with the automatic negative thoughts, like we were talking about earlier. So, cognitive flexibility is the ability to be able to realize when you're in the maladaptive thinking patterns, right? The automatic negative thoughts, the symptom thought patterns, the pops, noticing when you're caught in that line of thinking, and having the capacity or the flexibility to shift away from those thoughts, right? So oftentimes negative thoughts can be fairly compelling, right? Or we all have areas where we're more sucked in, let's put it that way. We're more sucked into those thoughts than we are to other thoughts, right? So we can have that tendency to buy in or believe certain lines of thinking patterns that are not helpful to us or not conducive, to ongoing well-being and recovery. And so, can we create and cultivate that cognitive flexibility to be able to recognize when we're stuck in that rigidity of thinking? Can we step back? Can we look at the bigger picture perspective? Can we shift out of that thought, shift out of those thoughts and come back to a space of entertaining other possibilities, right? And sometimes that might even start with like, when you notice a thought coming up, it might even start with, well, maybe that's true, maybe it's not. Let's wait and see. Even just by making a little statement like that, you're already starting to challenge the rigidity in thinking, right? Or, Byron Katie's work, which Daniel Amen talks about in his Conquering Negative Thoughts book, about challenging, those thoughts with the four questions, right? So asking yourself if it's true, right? And even just that starting point, can we know with absolute certainty, 100% certainty, that this is true? The answer is probably no. And so that also starts to open up the possibility, right? We can also start to step back and take a bigger picture perspective, and there's a multitude of ways to do that, but it's really about stepping back from the details and looking from a more broad perspective, right? And some of the things that we get caught up in, even if we ask ourselves, okay, so in 10 years from now, is this even going to matter? Am I even going to remember this moment or this scenario or this situation? Lots of times the answer is no when we put it in kind of that bigger picture context. Or another one that sometimes is used in cognitive behavior therapy is to step back like in space. So you imagine yourself away from you and your current experience. So you're looking down on the earth, you're looking down at your experience from thousands of miles away, and having that perspective of being outside of yourself, being distant and looking down. What do you see that's different? How do you notice that differently? And that can also be another way to start to create perspective. And so that's cognitive flexibility, right? So flexibility in our thinking, not getting too attached or too resistant, that would be the other side of the coin, to any particular thought. What we resist persists, what we attach, we give energy to, and what we give energy to, we grow. And so it's finding that neutral ground or that middle ground with those thought processes. So, cognitive flexibility. The next level, I would say, is emotional flexibility. So, this is where we start to look at, okay, what are our most common emotional states that we're entertaining? What are the emotional states that we tend to get stuck in, maybe a little bit more so than other emotional states? And if those emotional states are not conducive to our well being or moving us forward, then we want to start to look at how do we create a little bit more emotional flexibility? What tools can we use to change our emotional state? Right. And so, one of the most basic and easily accessible tools to change your emotional state is breath work. So our breathing is tied directly into our emotional state. And you may have noticed this, that when you're in certain emotional states, you have certain breathing patterns, right? So, for example, when we're angry or frustrated with something, oftentimes our breathing is really shallow. It can be really rapid. If we're really like off the charts angry, we might even be holding our breath, right? When we look at being in like a really content, peaceful, joyful state, oftentimes our breath is really long and really smooth, right? And we may have a little bit of, when we're in that state of enjoyment, we might even have a little bit longer inhale, Like, you think about stepping outside into the fresh air and the sunshine, what's an automatic response to that? Often we take a deep breath in, right? Or maybe we notice something pleasant in our environment. Maybe there's a beautiful flower blooming. You might find you take a deep breath in. That's a common, breathing pattern for positive emotions, right? And then we have other breathing patterns for worry or anxiety. We have other breathing patterns for depression or more of the down regulated aspects. And so what we know to be true about breath work is not only are there certain breathing patterns associated with emotional states, but that we can use breath to change our emotional states. And so that's where breath work starts to come in, right? By doing some alternate nostril breathing, by doing some ujjayi breathing or ocean breath, you're calming your nervous system, you're bringing in more of that peaceful, contented, um, emotional state, settling the mind a little bit. And of course, there's other ways to create that emotional flexibility, but meditation and breath work are a good start, right? And you can look at how that fits for you, right? So with each of these different categories, what I would invite you to do over the next, week or two is to really do a little bit of a self evaluation in each category. Where am I at, right? So with physical flexibility, and the ability to easily move my body, where are things at with that? With my thought processes, with my emotional states, where are things at with that? And just having that really honest, non-judgmental, curious observer perspective of what's showing up in those different areas. And then, we can only change what we're aware of, right? So the more awareness we cultivate in that, then we can start to work on each of those specific areas in a way that's conducive to moving forward. Now, the last notion of flexibility that we're going to discuss today, and it's a really important one too, is nervous system flexibility. So, nervous system flexibility is about being able to change out of certain emotional states, or nervous system states, I should say, not necessarily emotional states. So, it's that capacity to go in and out of a stress response when and as needed. And so, a lot of times, just like the other areas, we can get really rigid in limbic impairment. We can also get really rigid with our nervous system. And so, a lot of people who are going through the rewiring or retraining process have trouble with that flexibility. Their nervous systems tend to typically be stuck in a fight or flight response. Sometimes they're stuck a little bit more in a freeze response, and having difficulty shifting between states. And so when we look at ultimate health and well being, our ultimate resilience in our nervous system, it's having a baseline of homeostasis. So that baseline of rest and digest, that parasympathetic response, ventral vagal tone, positive ventral vagal tone, that sense of well being, calm in the system. That's where we're designed to live, right? So when we're looking at ultimate well-being, that's the baseline that we're looking to achieve. And then within that baseline, we're looking to be able to come flexibly in and out of different states when and as needed. So let's say, you're walking down the street and a car is coming at you pretty quickly. You want to be able to engage in that stress response in that moment to get out of the way. And then once you're out of the way, you want to be able to come back out of that, to come back into a state of regulation relatively quickly, with in terms of what's available to us as, the adrenaline and cortisol and all that stuff move out of your system. But you want to have that capacity to shift out, right? And so what often happens with limbic system impairment is we would have an experience like that, and then we'd be stuck in fight or flight response. And not only would our nervous system have trouble shifting out, but then oftentimes we would start to ruminate about it, replay the event in your mind, think about it, have emotional states associated with it, and all of that kind of perpetuates that state, rather than, okay, that was an event, it was over, it's over now, and now we can start to shift, our nervous system back. And sometimes when we're first learning, how to shift nervous system states, it requires some practice or some effort on our part in order to be able to do that. So again, with the nervous system, just like with the emotional states, breath work is great. Meditation is great as an ongoing practice to help your system learn how to be in a calm state, right? Like when we're looking at creating that baseline of homeostasis, the more time we can spend in that state, the more our system learns, and adapts to, okay, this is our new normal, right? And that's where meditation can be really, really helpful in calming the nervous system and giving us a little bit more prolonged periods of being in that calm, well regulated state. And we can use that to our advantage if we're practicing that some sort of meditation on a regular basis. It has a cumulative effect. So it starts to become a little bit more of our new normal. And then when that's the case, when our system is used to, if you want to call it that, used to being in that state, then, coming in and out of it starts to become a little bit easier. And when we do catch ourselves maybe caught up in a stress state, that's where, okay, what tools do we have at our disposal to start to come back out of that? And you might choose to do a round of practice. You might choose to do some alternate nostril breathing or some other form of breath work. You might choose to do a guided meditation or yoga nidra, something that really helps the system settle and start to play with that a little bit. So, all of these different areas definitely play a role in, like I said, that overall resilience, which is ultimately where we want to go, right? Like, recovery is not just about symptom alleviation, although that's fabulous. We want to be able to get to a place of how do we sustain that, right? How do we sustain that level of recovery so that as life happens, as events happen, we're not getting knocked off balance so much each time. And so, these four areas are areas to look at. Now, that was a lot of information. And if that feels overwhelming, it's like, oh my gosh. So now, on top of my brain training, I have all of this other stuff to do too. If it feels overwhelming, just pick one area, right? Pick one area and start there and start to look at that. And then, use that to your advantage, right? You start to look at that area, start to look at, okay, what are some little things or some small ways that I can actively intervene, and how can I incorporate that in my daily routine? And you work with that for a while. And then once that's part of your routine, if you feel so inclined, you pick the next one and you look at that. And all the while just kind of keeping that bigger picture perspective in the back of your mind that these all play a role. And so eventually we do want to, over time address all of them. So there was a question here. Are our DNRS rounds also accumulative? Is more better? Also, it sounds as if rounds are not enough to move forward. Any thoughts? Rounds are absolutely accumulative, right? The more you do, the better off your system is, and the more capacity you have to shift those states. I mean, that's ultimately what the round is helping you do, right? Shifting out of a dysregulated state into a more regulated autonomic state with positive thoughts and elevated emotions. It's really tackling most of what I talked about in terms of the flexibility parts, other than physical flexibility, in the round itself. And so there is absolute value in that. And the more you do, the more benefit you're going to get over time. Now, in terms of, it sounds as if rounds are not enough to move forward. I would say remembering that rounds, although they make up usually the key part of DNRS and also the Gupta program and the foundational part of primal trust as well, they are not the whole picture. Right. And so, even within the scope of DNRS, you're wanting to catch your pops throughout the day. You're wanting to elevate your emotional state. Doing an hour of rounds and then spending the rest of the day with like willy nilly, your brain is going wherever it wants to go, your emotions are going wherever they want to go. That's not going to get you very far very fast in terms of recovery, right? And so, retraining the brain is so much more than just the rounds, but the rounds are the foundation, right? And so we want to make sure we do have those, but we also want to look at what we're doing outside of those, how we're engaging in our life throughout the day. And how we engage throughout the day will have a huge impact on how quickly we alleviate symptoms, how quickly we be able to start to cultivate and maintain an elevated emotional state and stay there over a longer prolonged period of time, or make that more your baseline, right? And so yeah, it's looking at that bigger picture perspective. But if it sounds like I'm saying that rounds aren't important, that's not what I mean at all. Rounds are a key component, right? And they are absolutely crucial to do, especially in the earlier, months of rewiring. It is crucial to have that, definitely. And keep in mind, what's happening the rest of the time too. And finding ways to look from that bigger picture perspective of, throughout your day as you're cultivating your curious observer, am I reinforcing the maladaptive pathways, or am I reinforcing the alternative pathways, right? And the more time we can spend in the alternative pathways, the better off you're going to be. The sooner things will start to shift, and you'll be able to cultivate and grow, that more of the positivity aspects, more of the regulated nervous system, healthier, obviously symptom alleviation and all of that too. So, there's a question here. As I'm retraining on foods and have them back, I have periods where I get I'm assuming that stomach aches, even though I feel that these foods are safe. In the past, I would avoid the food again, but I'm choosing to keep eating them even though I'm getting symptoms. How do you suggest I navigate this even when I have several days of uncomfortable symptoms after eating food? And so, what I would suggest, I think that's great that you're not letting your symptoms dictate your behavior, right? Because you know that these foods are safe for you. You know that this is just the limbic system over responding, or an overactivation of it in response to these foods. So, it's about the pattern of association that your brain has with the food. So, things to keep in mind, and you're probably doing a lot of this already, is really looking at what you're doing when you're ingesting that food, or when you're getting ready to ingest that food. That's equally as important as what we do afterwards, right? And looking at what is the orientation with those foods. What are your belief systems around those foods and around rewiring around foods? Is there a stuck belief in there that rewiring around foods is a difficult task, it's a struggle, it takes a long time, things just to be aware of, right? Like, we want to start to look at, what are some of the core beliefs around this. That being said, also coming back to what I was saying just a moment ago, of how are we orienting to this. So, if we can orient from a space of really being excited about what we're introducing, right? So, again, as I've said, I think in previous Q and A's, you pick the things that you want to have back that bring that element of pleasure or value to you, and start with those, and then work your way to some of the things that maybe you're a little bit more neutral feeling about. Because when we have the elevated emotions already built in, this is something that we really want to have, that helps us in the rewiring process. And we can start to consciously cultivate that and connect with that too. So, let's say it's something that you're not like over the moon about, but you want to have back in your diet. Starting to look at, okay, why do I want to have this back? How is this going to be beneficial to me? And it might even just be something along the lines of, this is giving a variety of nutrients to my body, and I want to provide my body with the most nutrients possible. And I love myself, and I want to have, the best well-rounded diet possible. You might even just start with something like that, right? And so, it's looking at, okay, what is the association with that food, and also how are we approaching it, right? And so, if you're already noticing, because of the past pattern of eating something and then being uncomfortable afterwards, and sometimes that lasting for several days, is there already some fear and anxiety? Is there already some stress response in your system before you even ingest whatever it is that you're working with? And if there is, then we definitely want to start to take some time in that pre-ingestion phase to do a round of practice to calm your system, to change your association with the food in the ways that I just described, or there's maybe other ways that you can think of to do that. And then you go into the phase of actually eating whatever that is. And again, we want to be really mindful of what we're doing and what we're focusing on as we're eating it. So, can we create a pleasant experience and environment while we're doing it? And it might even just be like mindful eating, like sometimes people will do a mindfulness eating meditation where they're really slowing it down, really savoring, the texture, taking in even the color, the shape, the look before putting it in their mouth, feeling, the sensations. You might go that route. You might or alternatively, you might go a route of while you're ingesting this, you're elevating your emotional state. So you're thinking of something that you're grateful for, or people that you love, or what you're looking forward to doing today after you finish eating. You might have some good music on, or something that helps to change your emotional state, and you could cultivate that emotional state. So before you even sit down to have whatever that is, you're in a really pleasant, positive, uplifted, or at the very least calm, peaceful, compassionate state before you start that process of ingestion. And then we're being mindful of what we're doing while we're doing that. And then afterwards, y- as you finish ingesting, you might, like, it's always a good idea to sandwich round eating, or introducing something new with round the practice. So you might have done one before, you might do one immediately after, regardless of what's happening in your system. And I was just about to say what you're noticing, but we want to really step away from checking in to see what's happening in our system after we eat, right? And so that's a pop, and that is often a maladaptive pathway that, if we've had experiences of reactions in the past, we can get caught up in, right? And so, really, as you finish your eating, you do your round of practice, then you want to do, like Gupta talks about, re-engage with joy, immediately going to something else, without any sort of focus of attention on where you're at, or what shifted, or what's happening in your system, right? We want to take that really strong stance of active redirection into something that hopefully is a really good distractor for you, and if it's something that's a good distraction that has an elevated component emotionally, even stronger, even better, right? And so really actively moving into that. And then down the road, let's say, maybe you don't get something sensations wise immediately. Maybe it's, a couple hours later, or what have you. You treat it like any other pop when that happens. So let's say, a couple hours later, you're noticing stuff coming up. Go into a round of practice, or say stop, 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 actively direct, elevate your emotional state, and starting to minimize our focus of attention on it to the best of our ability. And sometimes that's challenging, when we have really strong sensations. And I would start to label them as sensations, rather than symptoms or reactions. They're just sensations in the body. And so, we want to be able to take our focus of attention away from that to the best of our ability, to do things in those moments, again, to elevate the emotional state. Because as we elevate the emotional state, or we change our emotional experience despite whatever sensations are showing up, it's sending signals to our brain that we're safe, right? And when we have those experiences, or we're sending those signals, we're receiving those signals that we're safe, that starts to calm the whole system down, and can sometimes in the moment shift those sensations. Sometimes those sensations shift later on, but we're not giving them any importance anymore. We're not giving them that sort of prioritizing of our intention. This isn't worthy of your time and attention anymore. We're trusting that your system, we're changing your brain's association with these things, and your system's going to figure that out, over time. It might not be right away, but the more we're consistent in how we respond and what we're doing around the practice of eating these particular things, the sooner your whole system is going to calm down. Now, I would say, if you're getting extremely strong sensations and it's like at that level where it's really difficult to shift away, and it's preoccupying a ton of your time and attention, despite your best efforts, then what we would want to look at is um, changing up a little bit how you're incrementally training with that. So it might be a little bit less, of what you're eating as a place to stay a little bit more within your training zone. Or it might be you're having this food every second day instead of every day, again, as a stepping stone, working your way up to being able to have it every day and do it more consistently. But that recognition that, while we're incrementally training, we do want to try and keep it somewhat within our training zone, which means, yes, we're in discomfort, but we're not in off the charts discomfort that it becomes really difficult to rein our limbic system in and to change, our thought processes and our emotional states. That's not going to be conducive to helping you move forward as quickly as sometimes that less is more approach. Now, one of the things to consider around that too is watch if you're experiencing a lot of frustration around, I just want to be done with this. I just want to have foods back. And we start to push a little bit harder. Watch if there's that tendency coming up, right? Because sometimes that feeling that we can have and that those emotional states of pressure and frustration can lead us to push a little bit too hard too quickly. And so, it's finding that balance between not fearing having a little bit of discomfort and being willing to push the edges of the envelope so that, we can make changes because we don't change in our comfort zone. So it's finding the balance between that and the other end of the spectrum of just getting so frustrated, saying screw it, and overdoing it so much that it's actually very difficult, for your system to then be able to change those pathways, to be able to come out of the limbic response when you're in it, right? So it's kind of finding that balance. And the other thing that I would say about that, and this is kind of my last thought on this topic, would be looking again to at the overall bigger picture perspective of all the things that are going on when you're deciding what is appropriate for within your training zone, right? So when we look at incremental training within our training zone, we want to keep that bigger picture context of, how many other stressors are happening currently at this time, because that will play a role in determining what's appropriate for within your training zone. Like, for example, if we're, maybe fighting a bit of a bug, we have some emotional stressors with family dynamics going on, or we're still in the process of deep grief and loss, or, there's a conflict with a child, or whatever those are. If we've got a whole bunch of other stressors happening right now, it's a recognition that the part of the reason why your system is reacting to the extent that it is because when we take that overall picture of stress, you're probably fairly significantly outside of your training zone at the moment, right? And so some of it might not even be related to the food directly. It might be related to the fact that, your system is in a heightened state just because of the circumstances, and that what's needed right now is more of the calming restoration, more of the elevated emotional states, more of the self-compassion, a little bit slower, in the incremental training with food, not totally setting it aside, but maybe, cutting back slightly so that you can get further faster, right? And so I'm not saying definitively that that's the case with you, But I'm just saying it's something to keep in mind. It's something for all of us to keep in mind whenever we're doing any kind of incremental training within our training zone, not just food, but any sort of that. We want to have that bigger picture perspective. We want to be able to trigger the limbic system and then actively redirect and reinforce other pathways, but we don't want to trigger it so much that we get stuck there and can't come out, because then we're inadvertently reinforcing the very thing that we're trying to undo, and we're making our process actually a little bit more difficult for us, right? We're prolonging it instead of being in that supportive state. And if there is a level of frustration of like, I just want to get past this, then do some work around that, right? Have a focus on, okay, what do I need to do to support myself with this? Is it a little bit of parts work with that part? Is it some self-compassion work of, yes, this is a really difficult time and I'm struggling. Can I invoke that level of self-compassion that I need to support myself through this process and calm my system? Or, whatever other way you want to do that, right? But yeah, keeping that sort of bigger picture context. And then also, I just had another final thought on this. I know I've been talking quite a bit on this, but that's okay. Another final thought on this is really looking at, reminding yourself of past successes that you've had with reintroducing things. If you are feeling that level of frustration, like things aren't moving, how long is this going to take? Or that feeling of belief of, am I ever going to get these back? Again, this comes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this call of automatic negative thoughts. We want to start to see those as automatic negative thoughts and start to challenge the truth of that. And one of the ways of challenging the truth of that is to remind your brain of all of the exceptions to that rule that it's creating around, this is difficult and this is going to take a long time, or I'm not going to get there, I'm questioning whether I'm ever going to get there. If you can remind yourself of times and places where you didn't have issues with that food, or maybe you were reintroducing foods and it was going swimmingly and you had like a really positive experience with it, reliving those in your past memory, or even just in your imagination outside of rounds of practice, starts to bring in or filter in the exceptions to whatever rules that your brain is trying to create around this topic, right? Or around this notion of what this means for you. So as we start to take in the opposite of that, or the exceptions to the rule, we broaden our filter in our brain of what we're allowing in, right? So that's the reticular activation system in the brain, the part that discerns like what's important to us, what's not, what we filter in, what exceptions we filter out. We want to train the reticular activation system to bring in all of those exceptions to the rule, to revisit those experiences, to know that there's been times where this has gone easily. There's been times where we've had no response to things that we've eaten in the past. And so we start to create that belief of, if I did that before, I can do that again, and use that as a place of empowerment, right? For yourself, both emotionally and in your thought processes and belief systems, to support you in this process. All right. And then there was another question about what books are most helpful for building resilience and flexibility? That's a really good question. I'll have to think on that. I don't have any sort of right off the top of my head, although I would say that anything in the realm of positive psychology. So there's lots of different authors, positive psychology authors, that have written books. And positive psychology is all about creating resilience and sustaining it, right? And so a lot of those books will support that notion of resilience, whether that's in the title or it's focusing on happiness, for example. There's lots of books on authentic happiness and cultivating happiness, which is also tied into cultivating resilience. So I would look in the realm of positive psychology, and you could even just type in resilience and positive psychology and see what comes up. And I'll give it some thought. I know there's probably something in the background there that would be a really good one, and I'll give it some thought, and I'll get back to you on what I come up with when I come up with something. All right. So, any other questions? So that's it for what's in the chat. But if anyone else has anything that they want to type in the chat, or if you want to come off mute and ask something, now would be a good time. I'll probably take one or two more questions, and then we'll go into our breath work and meditation today. Give it another minute. We're not in we're not in any rush. So if there is something that's maybe percolating back there that you want to ask about, feel free. And if not, we can take this time again, just like we did at the very beginning of this call, to just come back into the present moment, right? To take some deep breaths, breathing deeply into your belly, feeling your sit bones on the chair, your back against the back of the chair, your feet on the ground. That's it. And just allowing your system to just relax, be here in this moment with ease and grace. Good. So there's a question asking if you get a recording of this. So there is a recording available. I don't send it out to people individually. I post it on my website. So candywhitterfield.com slash vid or backslash videos is where you can access the recording. You can watch it as frequently or as often as you like. It gets posted there usually within a couple hours of us finishing. So, within by this afternoon anyway. It'll be up and running on my website. And the live Q and A's, all of the previous ones are also on there, so you're more than welcome to watch the other ones as well. There are some breath work, little 5-minute breathers and how-to instructions on some of the different types of breath work, which you're welcome to look at as well if that appeals to you. And then I do have a recording of a guided breath work and meditation, which is what we do at the end of each of these. That's just that component. So if you find you're wanting a little bit more of that regulation, you can always go and listen to that as well. So again, all of that is on my website, and I will just type in my name here because sometimes it can be a bit of a challenge to spell. And then you can, like I said, you can access that. It will be up pretty quickly after we finish here today. So, all right. So we'll go ahead now, unless anyone has anything else they want to add or share. We will go into our breath work today, our breath work and meditation. So let's start, seeing as we have a little bit of extra time, let's actually start with a slightly different form of breath work that we haven't done together yet. This one is called straw breathing or straw breath. It's a great one for settling your nervous system, for bringing it into regulation, bringing calm into your system if you're feeling a little bit stressed or anxious. And it's really simple, actually. So, how it works is you take a normal breath in through your nose, and then as you're breathing out, you breathe out your mouth as though you're breathing through a straw. So, you're going to take a breath in through your nose and then out through the straw. And as you do that, and you can continue to do this on your own at your own pace. So, breathing in through your nose, out through the straw, you'll notice that forming that straw that really slows down and lengthens our exhale. And it's the lengthening of the exhale that invokes the parasympathetic or the rest and digest response in our nervous system. So, continuing breathing in through the nose and then breathing out through your straw. Taking a few more breaths like this. Let's do a couple more rounds. And if you're finding you're feeling like you're running out of air, make your straw a little bit bigger. Sometimes we can purse our lips a little bit too much and it can create a little bit of a panicky feeling, which is kind of the opposite of what we're trying to do. So if you are having that experience, or you do later on, let's say you're practicing this at another point in time, just know, make your straw a little bit bigger. And you're still going to get the benefits without that feeling of not getting enough air or not breathing it out fast enough. And then doing one more breath. And as you finish breathing out through your straw, you can start to return to normal breathing and just noticing what you notice inside now. You might already feel like your system is kind of a little bit calmer. Sometimes people will feel a little bit of like a heaviness, which is really just being grounded in our body. So we can feel that things slowing down, perhaps even the mind chatter slowing down a little bit. So just noticing what you notice. And then let's follow it up. We're going to do a couple rounds of alternate nostril breathing before we go into our meditation. So if you remember how to do it, you can go ahead and get started. And if you need a little bit of guidance, then what we're going to do is take our left hand and put our thumb and index finger together, other three fingers stretched out, and then set it palm facing up on your lap. And right hand, you're going to take your pointer and middle finger and place them on the bridge of your nose. We're going to be using our right thumb to plug our right nostril and our ring finger um, to plug the left nostril. So you can close your eyes or having a soft downward gaze, whatever's most comfortable for you. Before plugging anything, taking a deep breath in and breathing out. And then plugging the right nostril with your thumb, breathing in your left. Plug your left and breathe out your right. Breathing in your right. Switch and breathe out your left. Breathe in your left. Switch and breathe out. Breathe in. Switch and breathe out. And continuing on at your own pace for a couple more breaths. Allowing yourself to take in deep, long inhales and deep, long exhales. And then the next time you breathe out your left nostril, When you finish breathing out your left nostril, you can relax your hand into your lap, keeping your eyes closed or your soft downward gaze. And just noticing what you notice internally, cultivating that curious and loving observer to see what you notice physically, mentally, and emotionally in this moment. And then from here, we're going to go directly into our meditation. So sitting comfortably and easily, making any final adjustments so that you're comfortable. And then trying to remain still for the remainder of the meditation to the best of your ability. Closing your eyes if they're not already. Take a deep breath in and let go. Take another deep breath in and breathe out. Let us bring our attention to the noises around us. Perhaps you hear traffic going by, or people talking. Maybe there's the sound of a fan or a furnace, or appliances. Accept all the noises around you. Accept all the noises. Be in harmony with your environment. Take a deep breath in and let go. Let us bring our attention now to our physical body. Your body is a gift from nature or the divine. Let us take a moment and honor our body. Bring your attention to your feet. Lower legs. Knees. upper legs, hips and pelvis, lower abdomen, stomach, chest, back, right shoulder and arm, left shoulder and arm, neck, face, head, the whole body. The whole body. Take a deep breath in and let go. Bringing our attention now to our thoughts, whether good thoughts or not so good thoughts. Let them come. Do not resist any thoughts. Just let them be. You are now in harmony with your thoughts. Take a deep breath in and let go. Bringing our awareness now to our emotional states. You are peace and joy. Bringing your awareness to your feelings, becoming aware of your thoughts, noticing any physical sensation, becoming aware of the environment around you. Take a deep breath in and breathe out. Another deep breath in and breathe out. And then in your own time, at the pace that feels right for you, slowly coming back into the present. You might want to wiggle your fingers or your toes. Might feel the urge to stretch. And then slowly, when you're ready, you can begin to open your eyes, coming back into the space, into the present. And then just taking a moment now to notice what you notice inside, cultivating that curious observer, to just become aware in this moment of our mental state, what we're experiencing emotionally. What is your overall state of being in this moment? You may notice more calm and relaxation. You might notice your mind is maybe a little bit slower, not so busy. So, if you're noticing any shift in the positive direction, no matter how little, let's take a moment to acknowledge and appreciate it, to feel gratitude for this moment and for this experience. And then let's take that gratitude and positive feelings and send it out to the world, out to your loved ones, your friends, people you don't like so much, to everybody. And then sending a little bit of that gratitude and compassion to yourself for taking the time to be here today and to engage in these tools that support your well being. And then when you're ready, again, just coming back into the here and now, to the present moment. How was that for everybody? Thumbs up, medium, down. Good, good. Awesome. Well, I wish you a very beautiful rest of your Saturday, and hopefully, I will see you again next month. Take care. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.